Ich will hier bei dir stehen. I will stand here by your side. A chorale from the St. Matthew's Passion. Utter simplicity, beauty shorn of its unessentials, truth stated unequivocally. Magically, such music diminishes one's fear of death by virtue of its serene attachment to life. Johann Sebastian Bach possessed such inner strength. His music, whether sacred or secular, elevates the spirit of the individual while preserving the proportions of man in his humility before the vastness of the universe. His music becomes miraculously more alive, more expressive the more it is heard, for it relates to truths which lie beyond creed or race, beyond conflict, beyond prejudice. After a time of near oblivion, it gains in popular acceptance with each succeeding generation. And all this without extrovert conductors, orchestras of thousands, nor yet of tenors holding endless high Cs, no tricks of the trade. Bach finds his way into our hearts without showmanship, without extravagance, with an economy of means and simplicity of style. His music matures like a well-tempered wine. It seems universal, and we recognize every first hearing of it as though we had heard it before somewhere and were now recalling it to mind. Now, what manner of man was it that could create such musical architecture in the minds of even the most unaware of listeners? Who could transcend the barriers of time and place, even of belief? Was he a saint, an alchemist, a wizard, or perhaps a very ordinary man endowed with extraordinary genius? We will attempt to answer some of these questions, or else merely to play some of his huge output of music and allow you to decide, which would perhaps be his preferred way of revealing himself. What does the word composer suggest to us? An emaciated man in a garret destined for an early death, whose genius is ill-considered by his contemporaries? A shaggy exhibitionist hammering the pianoforte in a Paris salon among swooning ladies of high society? Or perhaps a bearded man pushing the buttons of a synthesizer? Well, none of these images would apply to Bach, nor could they apply to the Germany of 300 years ago. It was a land of princelings and grand duchies, not at all the cohesive country of today. The fabric of society was simple. There were those who ruled and those who served. And there was no room in it for the composer per se, but merely for the musician, who was expected to do everything, even to write music, when he was not seated at the organ, leading a choir, or beating time for a chamber orchestra. Even Beethoven, many years later, was paid for duties as a music teacher, and was therefore considered as one of the domestics, along with pastry cooks, stewards, and coachmen. Music was written specifically for a variety of functions: church services, weddings, birthdays, funerals. And later on, Mozart was even requested to write light music for the Archbishop of Salzburg to prattle through. Musicians, although they did not enjoy high social standing, were in short supply. And every 30 or 40 miles there was another court, another town, and they were given a decent living on condition that they produced more and better music than any neighboring town could. And they did have one privilege, of course, which is not entirely true today. They had their music performed. It was guaranteed. So let us continue our journey into the Baroque period, leaving this chateau, Schloss Benrath, between Düsseldorf and Cologne, and going towards one of Germany's loveliest castles, Schloss Brühl. And there to hear Bach's music as he himself might have heard it, on Baroque instruments. Bach violin is not as powerful or as brilliant as those we hear in the concert halls today. There's less tension between the strings, the bow is more flexible, the sound is softer. And incidentally, in Bach's day, there were no conductors in the contemporary sense of the word. No one had ever heard of transmitting interpretive ideas. The conductor's sole duty was to keep the correct time, and he did so while playing the violin or the cembalo, or otherwise standing behind the organ waving a rolled-up sheet of paper. They even banged the ground with a pole. Lully, the French composer of Italian origin, died that way. He missed the floor and hit his foot, didn't look after it. Gangrene set in. It's a strange way for a conductor to die. Sometimes they're killed by critics, but not by poles. The orchestras, of course, were quite small, and besides, those aristocratic patrons with their strict sense of hierarchy would not have tolerated looking at anyone's back, least of all the back of their humble court musicians. Bach was not an aristocrat, of course, but he did belong to a dynasty of musicians. His family tree can be traced back to the 16th century. His great-great-grandfather, Veit, was a miller and an accomplished sitar player. His son, a carpet weaver, enjoyed a reputation as a violinist. From then on, the family produced professional musicians by the dozen, scores of them, trumpet players, town musicians, organists, cantors, and the like, holding important positions all over Germany for 2 centuries. The family symbolized the idea of music, so much so that in some regions people didn't say a musician, but simply a Bach. They were a very traditional family of devout Lutherans who clung to their roots in the forests of Thuringia. They were quite aware of their special gifts, and naturally every new addition to the family played an instrument as soon as he could hold it. Johann Sebastian Bach was a highly accomplished keyboard player, and he was one of the first to make use of the thumb. I mean, can you imagine playing the piano or the cembalo with only 4 fingers, even a scale? Oh. No. The thumb was only used at that time when absolutely necessary, in an emergency. Well, Bach devised a technique by which all 5 fingers were to be completely equal in strength and agility. They say he played with such ease you could hardly see his fingers move. Let's see if Israela Margalit can do it. That was the virtuoso Bach, full of energy, brilliance, and rhythmic joy. Another side of Bach is intimate and contemplative. There was a great deal of sadness in his life. He lost his mother when he was 9. His father died about a year later. His first wife died at an early age, and about half of his offspring did not survive childhood. His deep religious belief and strong character must have helped him overcome these experiences, which, however tragic, were fairly commonplace at the time. But there is no sign of Bach ever losing hope or courage. But in much of his music, we find an expression of universal sorrow. It's never more tangible than in his solo works for the violin and for the cello, a musical form which is quite rare. His chaconne for violin solo haunted musicians for generations. Brahms described it as a world of deepest reflection and violent emotion, all for one small instrument. And his works for solo cello became a challenge to every performer, from Casals and Rostropovich to Misha Maisky. Music for our time, too, a lonely voice in an overcrowded wilderness. Bach had no chance to be a lonely child, however. He was born on March the 21st, 1685, in Eisenach, in eastern Germany, the youngest of a family of 8 children. Educated by his town musician father, Bach was surrounded by the family clan, a close-knit group of which all the male members assembled every year in a huge reunion devoted to singing and, in the intermissions, to a warm exchange of experience and knowledge. That's happy music. But Germany at that time suffered from the aftermath of the 30 Years' War. Lack of unity, lack of fresh ideas, and lack of strong principles characterized the time. The Bachs, however, of course, were a law unto themselves. Their youngsters were brought up on a basis of sound morality and healthy introspection. And Eisenach, too, was a town of music, proud of its boys' choir, which, following the path of Martin Luther 200 years before, marched in processions through the streets singing in parts. Unfortunately, the death of his parents closed this happy chapter of Bach's life all too soon. At the age of 10, Johann Sebastian moved into the house of his older brother. Life was not easy. Money was scarce. Bach studied music, attended the Latin school, and helped the family finances by singing. He had apparently a lovely soprano voice, which eventually won him a scholarship to a good school in Lüneburg. He was 15 at the time. He learned Greek, Latin, theology, perfected his mastery of string and keyboard instruments, became a prodigious performer on the organ. He was a member of the school choir, and he earned a penny every time he sang at a wedding or a funeral. those lovely high notes were replaced by the deep voice of a self-possessed young man, smoking his precocious pipe and armed with his phenomenal virtuosity. Bach went about the usual business of finding a job. Arnstadt was a small town which had a splendid organ, and Bach's playing impressed the consistory greatly. What mastery of facility! At the age of 18, Bach secured his first important position. Over the years, Bach's organ playing became legendary. Later on, he held a position as organist, first in Mühlhausen, then at the prestigious court of Weimar. It was said that he could do with his feet alone what other organists could not do with their feet and fingers put together. He wrote a vast number of masterpieces for the organ, of which the Toccata and Fugue in D minor is perhaps the most widely loved. Bach's organ playing was above reproach. But this did not prevent him from getting into trouble. One of his duties in Arnstadt was the training of the boys' choir. Now, some of the students he treated quite roughly. He could not endure incompetence. On another occasion, he offended a sensitive bassoon player who attacked Bach with a stick. This became a major incident, according to the old town record. Bach, always sure that he was in the right, brushed the accusations aside. Did he use foul language? Did he even draw a sword? Well, if he did, was not right on his side? After all, his safety was in question. Now, he could no longer walk peacefully on the street unless the student or students involved were properly punished. The inquiry that followed decided otherwise. Bach was reprimanded. With characteristic defiance, Bach requested 4 weeks' leave and set out for Lübeck to hear the venerated Buxtehude play the organ. Oh, a marvelous opportunity to get away. Now, Buxtehude was a great master and old. He held one of the most highly paid positions in Germany. Bach found out that he could, with luck, inherit it. There was just one snag. Whoever got the position also got Buxtehude's daughter, and she was much older than Bach. Still a young bachelor and full of new ideas, Bach returned to Arnstadt after 4 months' absence, only to face a different kind of music. Why had he stayed away 3 months longer than permitted? Why were the organ preludes so excessively long? And after that, why were the organ preludes now too short? Moreover, there was a rumor that he had gone to an inn during a Sunday morning sermon, and he allowed a woman to practice singing in a church on consecrated ground. Oh, he ignored the accusations. This was vintage Bach. Rather than striving to defend himself, he simply lost interest in the case. He began looking for a position elsewhere. The final gesture of defiance was to marry the very woman he had allowed to sing in church, his cousin Maria Barbara. They lived happily, and she bore him 7 children before her untimely death 13 years later. A year and a half after that, Bach married the beautiful young Anna Magdalena, who remained at his side for the rest of his life. Bach wrote a so-called Musikbüchlein für Anna Magdalena, a collection of harpsichord pieces for his wife's delectation and improvement. Bach's family life was indeed happy and harmonious. Anna Magdalena gave birth to 13 children. She was a devoted wife, and at the end of a hard day's work, she would join Bach in copying music. He was deeply devoted to his wife and children. The family was the backbone of his existence, and his music was his way of life. It was a form of worship. As Bach might have said, to God alone the glory.
The Well-Tempered Bach. The Well-Tempered Bach with Peter.
Ask ourselves if man makes history, or indeed if history makes the man. Would subsequent music have been different had Bach never existed? Would Bach have written as he did if it had not been for some of his illustrious predecessors? Was he a great man to his peers? Was the man as great as his music? We tend to idolize and therefore romanticize the artist, but if we are dispassionate in our adulation, we too often find that the artistic inspiration and nobility of character are not necessarily synonymous. Far from it. Let us look for a moment at Bach's appearance. Rather severe features, a massive jaw, heavy eyebrows, burly physique, possibly a loud voice, and a subtle touch of humor about his mouth. A face which reveals determination, yet conceals all that is sensitive and vulnerable. There was a duality in his character. The outer man stubborn, irritable at times, proud, rebellious even. The inner man devout, humble, ethical, and modest. And yet his music is one of extraordinary consistency and total harmony. For Mozart, he was the man from whom one can finally learn. Beethoven performed Bach's well-tempered clavier. Brahms considered him my daily bread and butter. And Debussy saw in his music the most perfect purity of musical line. His music has stood up to all kinds of adaptation without losing its power or character. Busoni and Liszt transcribed his organ pieces for the piano. Jacques Lucier's Play Bach records became bestsellers. Japanese musicians play his music on their native instruments, and the swingle singers rejoice in his rhythmic drive. There is even someone who plays Bach on this. It is a bicycle pump. I can't give you the make, although piano's advertised, but I can't, unfortunately. It is Herr Franz Xaver Ohnesorg, the manager of Cologne's Philharmonic Hall. Is this the right way around? I'm so sorry. Sorry. He's playing the Badinerie from the second suite. Thank you very much. It's wonderful. Thank you. Bach never left his native country, but his music has crossed all frontiers. Unlike some purists, Bach would probably have welcomed all these adaptations. After all, he transcribed Vivaldi's violin works for the cembalo. What is labeled as plagiarism today was a common practice at the time. In the absence of royalties and with no thought of posterity, no one bothered about copyright. So let's listen now to one of Bach's originals, one of his most beloved works, the Brandenburg Concerto No. 3. Bach wrote the Brandenburg concertos in Cöthen during one of his most fruitful and creative periods. The previous position he held in the court of Weimar may have been more prestigious. His patron there, Duke Wilhelm, was a music lover, no doubt, but his despotic ways didn't suit Bach's independent nature, and the rift between them developed into an open clash once Bach requested, no, demanded his release from his duties. The incensed Duke put Bach under house arrest for a month. In Cöthen, however, Bach had a respite from controversies. Prince Leopold was young and loved music. It was a Calvinist court, consequently no church music was required, so Bach plunged into the writing of secular works. The sudden death of his first wife caused Bach great sorrow, but musical life was very rewarding. The prince befriended him, took him on a number of trips, and truly admired his music. However, the happy state of affairs was not to continue for very long. As he later wrote, "I thought to live there the rest of my days. It so happened that His Serene Highness Prince Leopold married a princess, and then it seemed as if the musical inclination of the prince had grown lukewarm, since the new princess appeared to be uninspired by the arts." Well, as is often the case, passion temporarily triumphed over the muses, and Bach was on the move again, this time to Leipzig, where he was to remain for the rest of his life. But at the time, with his usual instinct for survival, Bach turned his attention to the positive aspects of the change. After all, the children needed higher education, and perhaps it was a time for him to return to church music. In today's world, a musician who can do one thing well is considered highly skilled. In Bach's time, such a specialist would have had difficulty finding employment. The number of Bach's activities was simply incredible, even by the standards of his day. He wrote a vast amount of music of every kind. At one time, he was composing at the rate of a cantata a week. He transcribed his own music and that of other composers. He traveled extensively in Germany, designing and testing organs. He led orchestras and choirs. He taught many students beside members of his family. And on top of it all, his house was always full of guests. He mastered all the keyboard instruments, the violin and the viola. But there was one thing that even Bach could not do. Bach could not play two violins at the same time. One of the most beautiful pieces of music written by anyone, anywhere. Bach loved the singing quality of the violin. He was a master of the long line, no doubt influenced by the Italians who had melody in their blood. Bach then developed a special technique on the keyboard, trying to achieve a similar effect of vibration and continuity of the note. However, the instruments at his disposal could hardly satisfy his vision of legato sustained playing. The harpsichord provides for a variety of registers and has a dry, detached sound. It's an aristocratic instrument, frequently used at that time, but it was not Bach's favorite. Bach was quite attached to the clavichord, however, with its mellower and softer sound. The pianoforte was in the very early stages of its development. Bach took a vivid interest and made some important suggestions. How pleased he would have been with our modern piano, with its variety of tone, its power, its precision. Hearing this music, it's difficult to realize how belligerent Bach could sometimes be. When opposed, he would either lose his temper, ignore the instructions of his superiors, or go absent without leave. And Leipzig was the worst of all the places he had been. The city fathers had tried first to interest the celebrated Telemann in the post of cantor. He turned them down. Quite a few others, less famous, also refused the appointment, until they worked their way down to Bach. Almost immediately, he took a poor view of his new job. I find that the appointment here is not really as considerable as I was led to understand. It has been deprived of many perquisites. The town is very expensive. The authorities are strange people with little devotion to music, so that I have to endure almost constant vexation, envy, and persecution. The city council was of a different opinion. Not only does the cantor do nothing, but he will not give a satisfactory explanation for doing nothing. He is simply incorrigible. Both were probably right, to some extent. The state of music at St. Thomas's School in Leipzig, where he taught, was most unsatisfactory. The stingy council had little inclination to improve matters. On the other hand, Bach certainly did neglect many of his duties with a disobedience that stunned his orderly superiors. And yet, Bach's 27 years in Leipzig produced some of the greatest masterpieces of all time. The Mass in B minor, the St. Matthew Passion, hundreds of cantatas. St. Thomas's Church became a place of pilgrimage for music lovers for generations to come. During the first half of the 18th century, music was functional and commissioned. There were, as we have seen, vocal music for specific occasions and instrumental music for the type and quantity of instruments available. sometimes music for only a single instrument. Some commissions were distinctly odd, such as the demand on Bach to provide music as a therapy for insomnia. This urgent request for help came from the Russian ambassador to the Saxon court, who found it impossible to sleep at night and believed that music could have the desired effect. To almost everyone then and since, this marks a rare failure in Bach's career, since this sparkling score has kept audiences awake and aware for centuries. But evidently in the hands of the ambassador's personal harpsichordist, Herr Goldberg, the score had the opposite and the desired effect on His Excellency. However, one good turn deserves another. For a long time, Bach had been very keen to meet Frederick the Great. The applications to do so had remained unanswered. Evidently, the messages never reached the king. Now our soporific ambassador was transferred from Saxony to the court of Prussia. Remembering Bach's wish, the ambassador arranged for the visit. Frederick the Great was playing the flute when Bach arrived. Poor Bach had no time to change from his traveling clothes, so eager was the king to meet him. Old Bach! They talked music as the king showed off his palace, and before long, the king sat at his harpsichord and played a theme. Bach then improvised a set of majestic variations on that theme. The king was thunderstruck by the sheer mastery of the piece. Elaborated and extended, this stratospheric flight of imagination is known simply as ein musikalisches Opfer, a musical offering. The last years of Bach's life were marked by continued fame and increasing rejection. Though he continued to enjoy universal praise as an organist, his music was out of fashion. The Rococo, with its pleasant lightheartedness, its grace, its elegance, was now in vogue. Even Bach's eldest sons had no real understanding of their father's music. Bach took pride in their success, of course, which was even greater than his own, but their creative worlds were far apart. Bach's eyesight failed. The succeeding operations only aggravated his state. It was at this stage that Bach composed his purest, most abstract work, the Art of Fugue, one of the last great examples of polyphonic music. This was his final statement. He didn't live to complete the work. In July of 1750, Bach died of a second stroke at the age of 65. After his death, his family scattered. Anna Magdalena died 9 years after him in abject poverty. She was not helped by her children. The family tradition of mutual assistance had gone forever. Some of his sons became rich and famous in their time. The music of the Berlin Bach, Carl Philipp Emanuel, and of the London Bach, Johann Christian, was popular, was highly praised. But today, when the name of Bach is mentioned, we mean the one and only aging, blind Johann Sebastian. There is no sign that Bach was aware of the monumental importance of his music. Oh, he used to say that anyone who was willing to work as hard as he did would have obtained the same results. Now, if you look at his original manuscripts, you won't see any interpreted instructions. It's as though he wrote only for his own use. In his later years, he did publish some of his works, but most of them remained in manuscript. And after his death, many of his works were lost. His sons did very little to safeguard the scores. The music was nearly forgotten. One legend even tells us of how one cantata was found in a butcher's shop used as wrapping paper. It was more than 50 years before German musicians started rediscovering Bach. First a biography, then newspaper stories, and finally a festive performance of the St. Matthew Passion in Berlin, conducted by the 20-year-old Felix Mendelssohn, precisely 100 years after its first performance. It was not one man who unearthed Bach's music, but the whole movement of Romanticism in Germany, in search of ideals to guide it into its future. And who could say the final word better than that arch-romantic, the composer Hector Berlioz? Bach is Bach, just as God is God.
The Well-Tempered Bach with Peter Ustinov is made possible by a grant
To commemorate the Bach Tricentennial, a special poster has been commissioned which you can have free by writing Bach, Box 4545, Madison, Wisconsin. This striking 23 by 35-inch souvenir is printed on quality stock and will be shipped rolled ready for framing. To receive this limited edition poster free, write Bach, Box 4545, Madison, Wisconsin, 53711.
Will you win this $24,000 Mercedes-Benz?